I was a thief before I was anything worth being, and I didn't even know it. That's the part that took me longest to swallow, all these years. A man can carry a wrong his whole life if he believes he carried it for a wage. I rode for a Sac Cobb's Mustanging outfit through 2 hard summers, and I told myself we ran wild horses off the open range and broke them and sold them, and that was an honest enough trade for a man with no people and no land. I was 23 years old, lean as a fence rail, and proud of a thing I had no business being proud of, which is that I never asked a question I didn't want the answer to. We were 3 days up out of Dry Fork Bend, working the high country under the Bone Rim, when the Grello first showed himself. He came out of the breaks at dawn like a piece of the rock had decided to walk, mouse-gray, black-legged, a stallion with a neck like a drawn bow, and an eye on him that said he'd kill before he'd be caught. Cobb stood up in his stirrups and went still the way a man goes still over money. "That one," he said, "that one alone is worth the whole season." I should have wondered how Cobb knew the worth of a horse he'd never put a rope on. I didn't. I was already easing my dun forward, building my loop, feeling that hot, foolish certainty a young man feels right before the country teaches him something. The Grello broke north along the rim, and I went after him. The breaks above the Bone Rim are no place to run a horse. It's a country of false flats and sudden cuts, of shale that looks like solid ground until your animal's weight finds the lie in it. I knew that. I'd ridden it. But the Grello ran like he owned the seams in the earth, and I followed where he led because I had decided he was mine, and a man who has decided a thing has stopped looking at the ground. We went off a lip I never saw. I remember the dun screaming, which I had never heard a horse do before and have heard in my sleep many nights since. I remember the world turning over, the sky where the rock should be, the long, awful pull of falling. Then the ground came up and took my leg the way a door takes a man's hand when the wind slams it. A sound I felt more than heard, a white blaze of it that ran clear up into my teeth. When I could think again, the dun was dead below me, neck wrong, not suffering at least, and I was wedged in a cut maybe 30 feet down with my left leg bent in a place a leg has no joint. The sun stood at mid-morning. I could hear, far off and getting fainter, the sound of the outfit's horses. I called out. I called until my voice tore. I told myself Cobb would come. I told myself a man doesn't leave another man broken in the rocks. I lay there through the heat of the day and into the cold that comes fast and mean up high, and somewhere in the long hours of believing he'd come, I understood that he wasn't going to, and that he'd weighed me the same way he weighed a horse, and found me not worth the climb down. I want to tell you I prayed. Mostly I just got smaller. Pain does that. It boils a man down to a coal of himself, and the coal doesn't think about God or his mother or the wrongs he's done. It only wants the hurting to stop. By the second night I'd quit calling. By the gray of the third morning I'd quit most things, and I was watching the light come up the cut wall with the flat patience of an animal, when a shadow came over the lip above me, and a voice said something I didn't understand. I turned my head. There was a woman looking down at me. She was maybe my own age, in a dress of soft worked hide and a blanket the color of dried blood across her shoulders, her black hair in a long single braid. She had the stillest face I'd ever seen on a living person, not cold, but careful, the way you'd watch a snake to learn whether it was the kind that kills. Behind her 2 men appeared, then a third, all of them looking down at me and the dead dun and the broken country. One of the men said something hard, and I caught the shape of it even without the words leave him. I'd have said the same in his place, had I known then what I learned later, but the woman didn't move. She looked at me a long moment, at my leg, at my torn-out voice, and then she came down into the cut. I don't know how she came down. It was no path, but she came, sure-footed, and knelt in the shale beside me, and the first thing she did was lay the back of her hand against my cheek to feel the fever in me, and the second thing she did was take my ruined leg in both her hands so gentle I hardly cried out. She looked up at the men and spoke, and there was no asking in it. It was a woman telling men what would be done. They argued. She didn't. She simply waded them out the way the rock waits out the river. And in the end they brought rope and a hide litter, and they got me up out of that cut a hand's breadth at a time. And the woman climbed beside the litter the whole way with her hand on my chest. And every time the pain took me she hummed, low, 3 notes and a fall, 3 notes and a fall. And I am not too proud to tell you I held to that sound like a drowning man holds a floated branch. That was Nea. I didn't know her name yet. I didn't know I'd been pulled out of the rocks by the daughter of the very people my outfit had spent 2 summers robbing. I didn't know that the grullo I'd chased off the rim was no wild horse at all, but one of theirs, run off and gone feral, and that Cobb had known it, and had sent me after him into that country on purpose, because a green hand chasing a stolen horse to his death is a tidy way to be rid of a man who'd started asking questions. I knew none of it. I only knew the 3 notes and the fall and the woman's hand, and that I was, against my own expectations, still alive. They carried me up onto the mesa, to a place I had ridden past a dozen times and never truly seen. A long green valley folded into the high country, fed by a spring that came up cold and clean out of a black rock face and ran the length of it. There were maybe 40 lodges, horses in the hundreds grazing the flats, racks of drying meat, women at looms under brush arbors, children who came running and then stopped dead at the sight of the white man on the litter and went silent in a way children should never have to learn. Because they knew my kind. That was the thing I'd come to understand. They knew men who looked like me. Men who looked like me had been taking from them for a long time. They put me in a lodge at the valley's edge, a little apart, and Nea doctored my leg. I have been set by army surgeons since, and by a Mexican bone setter in Sonora once, and I will tell you that no man ever did better work on me than that woman did with her hands, and the things she carried in a deerskin bag. She had a way of feeling along the break with her eyes closed, reading it the way you'd read a trail. She splinted it with willow and rawhide soaked, so it dried hard as iron. She made me drink bitter things and ate something herself first to show me it wasn't poison, though I learned later she did that not for me but for the watching elders, to spare me the shame of being seen to be afraid. She packed the swelling with cool mud and a poultice that smelled of crushed green, and she changed it twice a day. And through all of it she said almost nothing, because there was almost nothing we could say. I had perhaps 10 words of Spanish that might cross over, and they had a few of the same, and that was the whole of our bridge those first weeks, a handful of trade words and the things a face can say. Water, hurt, good, no. It is a strange and lonesome thing to be wholly in the keeping of people you cannot speak to, and stranger still to begin slowly to not mind it. Words are how a man lies mostly. Stripped of them, I had only what I did, and how I bore the pain, and whether I said thank you with my eyes. I think now I learned more about being a decent man in those silent weeks than in all my years of talk before. An old man came to look at me on the 3rd day in the valley. He was lean and straight-backed, with gray in his braids and a face cut deep by weather and thought, and the way the others gave room when he came told me before anything else did that he was the one they listened to. He stood in the lodge door a long while. He looked at me the way a man looks at a debt he's not sure he wants to collect. Then he said one word to Nea, and she answered him with 2, and whatever passed between them, it ended with him giving the smallest nod and going out. That was Sacco, Nea's father, the headman of the valley. I would come to fear his judgment more than I'd ever feared any gun, and to want his good opinion more than I'd ever wanted anything. But that morning he was only an old man deciding whether to let me live, and I had sense enough to lie still and let him decide. Nea stayed. She didn't have to. There were others who could have changed a poultice, but she came morning and evening, and she began, in the way you gentle a wary colt, to draw me out. She'd point at a thing and say its name in her tongue and wait. Spring, fire, hand, horse. I'd say it back wrong and she'd not laugh, she'd just say it again, patient as weather, until I got it near enough. And then one evening she pointed at her own breastbone and said her name slow twice, Nea, and pointed at me. "Reuben," I said, "Reuben Hale." She tried it. It came out soft and strange in her mouth. The R rolled. And it was, I think, the first thing in 3 years that made me want to laugh instead of curse. And I did laugh. And she almost smiled, not all the way, but a loosening around the eyes, and something turned over in my chest that I didn't have a name for in any language. My leg knit. It took the better part of 2 moons, and there were days it went bad and the fever came back, and Naya sat through the night feeding the fire and humming her 3 notes. And there were days it was better and she'd help me up to sit in the lodge door and watch the valley work. And as I watched, I started to see what I had not let myself see before. I saw a people, not the thing Cobb had taught me to see, not the renegades, not the horse Indians, not a problem to be ridden around or run off. I saw families. I saw an old woman who scolded everyone equally and was clearly the funniest person in the valley by the way the children gathered to her. I saw a young man, Naya's brother, called Teo by the Mexican traders, and something I couldn't say by his own people, who was vain about his hair and a terror on a horse, and who came to glare at me daily out of pure brotherly suspicion, until the day I made him laugh by falling off my own crutch, after which he decided I was a fool and therefore harmless, and brought me water without being asked. And I saw the horses. Lord, the horses. I had thought myself a horseman. I had been a roper and a rough breaker, a man who got a saddle on a thing by main force and called it broke when it quit fighting. These people did something else entirely. They didn't break a horse. They came to an understanding with it. I watched Naya work a yearling in the early mornings before the heat, and it was the nearest thing to a conversation between 2 kinds of creature that I have ever seen. She moved slow. She gave the colt its distance and then asked with her body for a little less of it, and gave it back when the colt got frightened and asked again, and never once did I see her angry and never once did I see her quit. And she sang. The 3 notes in the fall, that wasn't a thing she did just for a man in pain in the rocks. It was how she talked to horses. It was the oldest thing she knew. I asked her about it, the way you ask without words. I'd point at her, and at the colt, and at my own ear, and she understood. And one morning she let me sit on a robe at the edge of the corral and watch her gentle the grullo. Because they'd caught him. The same stallion that had killed my horse and broken my leg and that Cobb had sent me to die chasing. Naya's people had brought him in not a week after they brought in me. Run him into the canyon trap with a patience I couldn't have managed in a year. And he was a devil. He'd struck a man and broken 2 rails, and there was talk. Teo gave me to understand with much pantomime, of putting him down before he killed somebody. He was that valuable feral horse a man cannot use and cannot bring himself to kill, the worst kind of property there is. Sako had said no. Sako had said, let Naya try. So I sat at the rail in the morning cool and watched a woman walk into a corral with a stallion that wanted to kill her, and I learned what courage actually looks like, which is not a man with a gun, but a woman with empty hands and a soft voice, and the patience of the spring coming up out of the rock. It took her 11 days. I counted them, because by then counting her days had become the shape of mine. She did almost nothing the first 3, just stood in the corral and let the grullo wheel and threaten and blow, and went out again, and came back, until the horse learned that her coming in did not mean a rope, and her going out did not mean she'd won. The 4th day she sat down in the dirt with her back half turned, the most undefended thing a person can do near a killing horse, and she sang. 3 notes and a fall, over and over. And the grullo, who had been bred for nothing but to run free and had then been stolen and lost and made wild and afraid, stood at the far rail with his ears working back and forth, hatting her and unable to stop listening. On the 11th day he came to her. He came 1 stiff step at a time across that corral with his neck low and his eye rolling, and Naya did not move, did not look at him, only sang. And the grullo put his muzzle down at last and breathed into the back of her neck, and a sound went up out of all the watching people that I will hear at the end of my life. Not a cheer, nothing so loud, just a long-held breath let go all at once, the sound a people makes when one of its own has done a holy thing. I looked away from the horse to the woman, and the woman was looking at me. Across the whole corral, across the whole divide of everything we were, she found my eyes and held them. And I knew, the way you know weather, the way you know you've ridden into country you'll never ride back out of unchanged, that I loved her, and that it was the most impossible thing I could possibly do, and that I was going to do it anyway. That was the easy part. Loving her was the easy part. The hard part came on a day not long after, when my leg had healed enough that I could get around on a cut willow staff, and I limped up the valley to where the men kept the horse herd, and I looked at the brands. I knew that brand. The forked Y, I'd seen it 100 times. It was the brand of a rancher named Devery down on the Dry Fork Flats, and I'd seen those same forked Y horses, dozens of them, run through cobs holding pens and sold off east under a running iron that turned the Y into a bell. I stood there in that high green valley among a people who had healed me, and I looked at horses wearing a brand I'd helped sell stolen, and the whole foul shape of it came up out of the ground at me at once. We weren't Mustangers. We never had been. Cobb's outfit was a horse-thieving operation, and the wild herds we gathered were stock run off from ranches and off the open range and, God help me, off this valley. Off these people, again and again, year after year. A slow, steady bleeding that I had been part of and paid for and never once questioned because I didn't want the answer. The Grullo wasn't wild. He was theirs. Cobb had run him off in some earlier raid, and when the horse went feral in the breaks, Cobb couldn't catch him and couldn't bear to lose him, and so he dangled him in front of a green fool in front of me, and sent the fool to break his neck in that country and clear a witness off the books at the same time. I sat down on a rock. I was a long time getting up. I tried to tell her. That was the worst hour of my life to that point, worse than the cut in the rocks. I had no words, only the few we'd built between us, asterisk spring and horse asterisk and good and no, and I had to make a woman I loved understand that I was one of the men who'd been stealing from her people her whole life. I pointed at the brand. I pointed at myself. I made the shape of a running iron, of horses driven off, of Cobb's outfit, of money. I made the shape of I knew, and I did not stop it, which is a hard shape to make with your hands and an easy one to make with your face. Naya watched me. She watched me confess in a language of dirt drawings and shame, and her still face went stiller, and something behind her eyes closed like a door, and she stood up and walked away from me, and I let her go, because what right did I have to call her back? I thought that was the end of it. I thought I'd be put out of the valley or worse, and that I'd earned it. I spent that night not sleeping, working out in my mind how I'd leave, where I'd go, knowing the answer was nowhere and no one. In the morning, Sacco came for me. He came with 2 men and Teo wouldn't look at me, and I understood that Naya had told her father what I'd confessed. They walked me up the valley to the brush arbor where the old men sat, and they sat me down in front of Sacco, and through a half hour of the hardest talk I ever took part in, Teo doing what he could to Bridget, the old woman who scolded everyone there too, throwing in sharp words, my few trade words doing more work than they were built for. Sacco laid it out. He had known, of course he had known. He had known for 2 summers that an outfit out of Dry Fork Bend was bleeding his herd, and he had counted his losses, and he had held his young men back from a war he knew they could not win, because to ride down on white ranchers and the men they'd bring, even justly, was to bring the soldiers, and the soldiers would not stop at the thieves. He had been carrying that, the wrong done to his people, and the worse wrong he'd have to swallow to keep them alive, the whole while I'd been lying in his valley calling myself a guest. And here, fallen into his hands out of the very rocks, was one of the thieves, healed by his own daughter, in love with her, which he could see, because old men see everything. He had every reason in the world to be rid of me. He looked at me a long time. Then he said, through Teo, through the trade words, through the patient, terrible work of 2 peoples trying to mean the same thing, you came with thieves, a pause that lasted a year, but you did not stay one. And then the words that remade my whole life, a man is not the men he rode in with. A man is what he does when he learns the truth of his own riding. So, what will you do? I want to tell you I gave a fine answer. I didn't. I sat there with my throat shut and tears in my eyes in front of a council of men who'd buried their own to my kind, and the only thing I could get out in their tongue, in the words Naya had taught me one at a time across 2 moons, was a string of them that meant something like, I will bring back the horses. All of them. I will go down and bring them back. Sako looked at me for a long moment more. Then he did a thing I will never forget. He reached out and put his hand flat on my chest, over the place where, weeks before, his daughter had laid her hand to feel the fever in me, and he said one word, and Teo, when he translated it, was grinning despite himself. The word meant try. It was not a blessing. It was not yet trust. It was a chance, which is more than I deserved and exactly as much as I needed, and I have spent the rest of my days trying to be worthy of the size of it. I knew where the stolen herd was. That was the thing I had that no one in the valley had. I knew Cobb's holding ground, the Box Canyon 2 days south where the outfit kept runoff stock until a buyer came up from the border. I knew his men, 8 of them, and which were hard and which were only weak. I knew the running iron was kept in a coffee tin on the chuck wagon, and that Cobb slept light, and that there was one young hand, a kid named Pelham not much past 16 who'd thrown in with the outfit the way I had, out of having nowhere else, who I thought might still have a soul in him if it came to it. But I wasn't going to ride down there with the valley's young men behind me, war-painted and angry, and start the very thing Sako had spent 2 summers preventing. That would have brought the soldiers. That would have ended his people. So I made a different plan, and I made it with Naya, because by then, and this is the part I am proudest of, I had stopped being a man who decided things and went, and become a man who asked. She came to me the night after the council. She came to the lodge at the valley's edge and sat down across the fire, and she was not angry anymore, or if she was she'd put it somewhere a person can put a thing and still work. I had thought I'd lost her. Instead she'd been thinking. She laid out in our slow, built-up language and in drawings in the ash what she saw, that to take the horses by force was to lose everything, and that to take them by guile was to risk only me, and that she would not let me go alone. I tried to tell her no. A man does that when he's been a fool long enough to start being brave. She heard me out. Then she said the thing that ended the argument and most of my old self with it. She pointed at the Grullo's corral and at her own chest, and she made me understand. I gentle what cannot be forced. That is what I do. You go to take the horses by force and you will fail and die. I will come and we will take them the other way. And God help me, she was right, and I knew it, and I let her be right, and that, letting her be right, walking into the worst danger of my life behind the lead of a woman because she was the wiser of us, was the moment I quit being the man Cobb had made and became, at last, somebody worth Sako putting his hand on. We went down out of the high country with 4 people. Naya, her brother Teo, who would not be left, a quiet older man called by the trade name Rays, who was the best tracker among them and who watched me the whole way with a flat readiness that told me exactly what would happen to me if this was a trick. And me. 4 people and a string of fast horses and no war party, no guns drawn, because the whole plan turned on no shot being fired. Here is what we did. I'll tell it plain because it's the kind of thing that sounds like nothing and was, in the doing, the most frightened I have ever been. We came up on Cobb's Box Canyon on the 2nd night in the dark of the moon. The held horses, better than 60 head, the bleeding of 2 summers, forked Y and Bell and a dozen other brands, and here and there, the clean unbranded coats of the valley's own were bunched at the canyon's deep end behind a brush and pole gate, with the camp at the mouth and a single man on watch. The plan was Naya's, root and branch. Force opens a gate and starts a stampede and a gunfight. We were not going to open the gate. We were going to call the horses out. Because she gentled half of them. That was the thing none of us white men ever understood, and that cost Cobb everything. Over 2 summers, every time the outfit ran off the valley's stock, they ran off horses that knew Naya's hand and Naya's 3 notes. You can steal a horse's body. You cannot steal what it learned at the spring in the cool of the morning. Those horses, penned in the dark in a strange canyon among strangers, were waiting, the way the Grullo had waited at the far rail, for a sound they knew. Reyes and Teo slipped down and eased the brush gate open, quiet, no rush, while I lay in the rocks above the camp with my heart going like a drum and watched the lone night herder, and prayed he'd stay watching the fire and not the dark. And Nea, out beyond the canyon's mouth where the held horses could just hear her, lifted her voice and sang. 3 notes in a fall, low, the oldest thing she knew. I've never heard a sound do what that sound did. The held horses came awake all at once. Heads came up all down the canyon, and then the gentled ones, a dozen, 2 dozen, turned and walked toward the open gate, and the voice, easy, unhurried, the way a horse comes to a hand it trusts, and the rest of the herd the way a herd does, came after them, drawn along by the calm of the ones who weren't afraid. No stampede, no thunder. Just a long, quiet river of horses flowing out of that canyon in the dark, toward a woman singing, and behind them, Reyes and Teo, turning them gently up the trail we'd come down. The night herder heard it too late. He stood and squinted into the dark and called out, and that was the one bad moment, the moment the whole thing could have turned to gunfire, and it turned instead on the boy. Because the night herder was Pelham, the 16-year-old, and when he came stumbling up into the rocks with his rifle and found me there, me, Reuben Hale, who he'd thought dead 2 months in the breaks, he froze, and I had time to say to him low and fast the truest thing I knew. Kid, these horses are stole, you know they're stole. You throw down now and you didn't help steal 'em. You raise that gun and you're a horse thief for the rest of your life. Your call. He was a long second deciding. Then he set the rifle down in the dirt and he was crying and he said, I never wanted none of this, Reuben. And I said, I know it. Go on and get gone before Cobb wakes. Go home. And he went, and as far as I know he made it, and that was one soul saved out of the wreck of that outfit, which I count. Cobb woke when the herd was already moving. He came boiling out of his bedroll, firing into the dark at nothing, at the sound of leaving horses, at the shape of his money walking off. And that's where the night nearly killed me after all, because I'd come down out of the rocks to turn a knot of horses that had balked. And Cobb's 3rd or 4th shot found me, took me through the meat of the shoulder, and spun me into the dirt. I won't make a tale of it. It hurt, and I bled, and I thought for a bad minute I was done. But the herd was already gone up the trail, and Cobb was firing blind, and there were only the 2 of us in the dark. And when he came on to find what he'd hit and saw it was me, saw it was the green fool he'd left for dead, alive and stealing his stolen horses back. He stood over me and raised the pistol for the last time, and his face had the simplest hate on it I have ever seen. And Nea took him off his feet. She'd come back. Of course she'd come back. She'd handed off the herd and come back up the canyon afoot in the dark looking for me, and she hit Cobb low and hard from the side, all of her against all of him, and the pistol went off into the rock and his footing went out on the loose shale, that same lying shale that had taken my leg, and Cobb went down and his head found a stone, and he did not get up again. I have never been sure in all the years whether that fall killed him or only stunned him, and I have made my peace with not knowing, because I did not do it and neither by intent did she. The country took him. The same false ground he'd sent me to die on took him instead. There is a kind of justice in that I have learned to leave alone. Nea got me up. The shoulder was bad, but it wasn't dying, and she packed it with her hand pressed hard against the bleeding and her face an inch from mine in the dark. And she said my name, the soft rolled wrong way she said it that I loved, Reuben, like a question and an order both. And I said back the few words I had that meant I'm here, don't be afraid. And we went up out of that canyon together, leaning on each other, 2 halves of one limping creature. And behind us in the dark, the last of Cobb's outfit was waking to find the horses gone and their boss down and no fight left worth having. They didn't follow. Men who steal for a wage don't die for it. By the gray of morning, they'd scattered to the 4 winds, and the box canyon was empty, and 60 head of horses were strung out up the high trail headed home. We brought them up into the valley 2 days later in the long gold light of an evening, and I will not be able to make you feel what that was. The whole of the people came out. They came down off the mesa and out of the lodges, and when they saw the herd, when they saw their own horses, the unbranded coats they knew, walking home up the valley after 2 summers, there went up a sound bigger than the one in the corral, a keening, glad, grieving sound, and old people put their hands over their mouths and young men ran to the horses and put their faces against familiar necks. And Sacco stood at the head of his people and watched his herd come home. And then he turned and watched me come up behind it, shot through the shoulder, leaning on his daughter and his face. I had thought it a face that didn't change. It changed. He came down to meet us. He stopped in front of me. I was past words in any language, swaying on my feet, and Nea's arm was around me, holding me up in front of her whole people, which was its own kind of declaration, and we both knew it. Sacco looked at me, and he looked at his daughter holding me up, and he looked back down the valley at his horses coming home, and then he reached out and put his hand on my chest one more time, over the new wound and the old fever place both, and he said, loud enough for all of them to hear, the words I'd carry to my grave. You came with thieves, but you did not stay one. And he turned to his people and said it again so all of them would have it, and the sound they made then was the one I started this telling with, the long-held breath let go, the sound a people makes when a thing is set right. Nea healed me a second time. The shoulder was a longer business than a man likes, and there's a winter morning still when I feel it. But there's a difference between being doctored by a stranger you can't speak to and being doctored by a woman you've stood beside in the worst dark of your life. And that winter, healing in her valley, we built the rest of our bridge a plank at a time. I learned her tongue past asterisk spring and horse into the words that matter, the words for asterisk stay and asterisk always, and the word her people used for the thing between a man and a woman who have chosen, which is not a word you say lightly, and which I did not say until I'd earned the right to. She came to me of her own choosing. I want that set down plain, because of the kind of man I'd been and the kind of men I'd ridden with, and because of every cheap story told about my kind and her kind on this frontier. No one gave Nea to me. No one could have. She was the freest person I ever knew, a woman who could gentle a killing horse with empty hands and turn a war into a song, who had pulled me out of the rocks against the counsel of her own men and been right. When she chose me, it was a choice, made clear-eyed on her own terms, the terms she named herself, that I would live in her valley and learn her people, that her work was hers and the horses were hers and I'd be a partner in it and not a master of it, that any children we made would be raised knowing both the things their two bloods knew. I agreed to every word of it, and I have kept every word of it, and they were the best terms a fool was ever offered. Sacco married us in the way of the valley, in the gold of another evening, with the grullo, gentled now, Nea's own saddle horse, the devil turned to her hand, standing at the corral rail watching like he'd had a part in it, which I suppose he had. The old woman who scolded everyone cried and pretended she didn't. Teo gave me a horse of his own as a brother does, and told me, in his Mexican trade words and a grin, that I was still a fool but that I was now asterisk his fool, which I have decided is the kindest thing a brother-in-law ever said to a man. We built a place where the two worlds met, not in the valley alone and not down on the flats among my own kind, but at the edge of both, a horse ranch in the broad bench country below the bone rim, on land Sacco's people had run horses on for longer than anyone could count, and that I helped them hold by being, when the white law and the white buyers came around, a white face that knew how to talk to them and was not afraid to. That was the use I turned out to have. I'd come into that country a thief who didn't know it. I made myself, by the end, a kind of gatekeeper, a man who stood at the divide and saw to it that what crossed it crossed honest. We bred horses that both worlds wanted. Nea gentled them and I sold them, and the work was clean, every head of it, and I never in my life again touched a running iron or asked a money question I didn't want the answer to. I am an old man now. I'm telling you this from the porch of that bench country house, and it's evening again. It's always evening in the part of a life worth telling, and the light is coming gold up the valley the way it did all those years ago. My leg aches when the weather turns, and my shoulder aches when it's cold, and Naya's hair went gray a long time before mine did, and she is still, to my eye, the stillest and most certain person in any country I've ridden. She's out at the corral now in the last light with a colt, and I can hear her, faint, 3 notes and a fall, 3 notes and a fall, the oldest thing she knows, the sound that pulled me out of the rocks and called the horses home and built every good thing I've got. Our grandchildren are down there with her, the ones who carry both bloods, learning the song. The boy can already nearly do it. He's got her hands. People ask me sometimes, the few who get the whole of it, how it was that a man like me, who came into this country with horse thieves, ended up where I am. They expect, I think, that I'll say I rescued her. That's the story men like me are supposed to tell. The hard man who saved the helpless woman. I let them think it sometimes when I'm tired. But it's a lie, and you've heard the truth now, so I'll say it to you straight, the way I've only ever said it to her. I didn't save anybody. I was the one half dead in the rocks. I was the one who'd done wrong and didn't know it. They saved me, her people saved me, and she saved me twice over, once with her hands and once with everything else, and the only decent thing I ever did was let myself be saved, and then turn around and try to be worth it. That's the whole of it. A man is not the men he rode in with. A man is what he does when he learns the truth of his own riding. I learned mine in a high green valley, from a woman singing to a horse, and I have been a long, lucky lifetime making it good. She's calling the colt in now. I can hear it come. I believe I'll go down and stand at the rail a while and listen.